Good morning. I will call this meeting to order and ask for approval of the agenda.
I'll make the motion.
From Karen?
Joey.
I'm sorry, Jody.
That's okay.
Karen's normally here. Second from James. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Public comment. Nobody? Moving on to old business, item A, consideration of agreement with Little River Holdings LLC for the sale of 285 River Street for the development and activation of the site. Little River Holdings LLC is working with a group of private investors for a greater project that 285 River Street will be an enhancement to. The selling of this property will allow for greater funding opportunities and control of the project when presenting to developers. Please see attached agreement. I've asked Caitlin to summarize this, and Tom, St. Dennis, and Tyler Leffman are here for Little River also.
Thank you, Kyle. The agreement in front of you, other than a couple spelling and grammar things we're going to adjust to, is the legal language of what we had on both the memo from last September and then the resolution from last October. It talks about the MSU study in the spirit of, it talks about the as-is condition, it talks about the investment of what we've invested into the property. This agreement addresses that without the investment of the property within 3 years, there would be a sale for what we have invested into the property. But with the timeline of their project, it looks like it's gonna go through. The only thing that we've discussed before that is in the agreement is the rent, and that's a little bit more involved in the conversation. And I didn't want to ruin us by addressing it in this agreement. Did anyone else have any additional questions from the resolution or memo to this agreement?
I didn't understand that last comment about rent.
We're
It's the
gonna-
first time hearing about that, so tell me more what that is, where that plays a role, when it would kick in, what it covers. Again, it's the first time hearing about that, so I know nothing about what that is. And
It's because we haven't had a conversation in that, that's why it's not in here.
okay, but what is it? What is it for? Or who's being rented to, and for what period of time, and why?
There's a building going there, but that's the only conversation.
Oh, our
So-
potential use in the future of that site.
That's the only stipulation we talked about that isn't written in this one.
Okay, I was thinking somehow we were getting rent in lieu of it, or while it was being constructed, so, okay, thank you.
Not in this one.
I was very confused.
Thanks for the clarification, Barry. Does anybody else have any questions? Tom, Tyler, anything you want to say? No?
Thank you.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I guess I'll make the motion to approve the agreement as presented.
Motion from Barry, thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Second from James. Any discussion? Hearing none? Just need to be a roll call.
You should.
Okay.
Kyle Mosher,
Yes.
Tamara Deponio. Yes. Barry Lynn,
Yes.
James Booter,
Yes.
Jody Walter.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carried, thank you. Item B, under old business statement, the Manistee DDA Board authorizes Chairperson Kyle Mosher as the signer for the sale of 285 River Street to Little River Holdings LLC. There was nothing really that said this in our bylaws, so Caitlin brought it up and thought it would be appropriate. That,
I wanted it in the minutes and I wanted to just address that he would be the signer, as he's been the signer on last projects and we don't have a clear line in our bylaws or ordinances.
yeah,
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
One abstention.
Item C, discussion of Manistee DDA 2020-2021 budget proposal to the city of Manistee. Final draft of the DDA budget is due to the city for inclusion in the city budget by Tuesday, March 24, 2020. The recommendations from today's special board meeting will provide the executive director the direction and support for submitting of the DDA budget to the city staff before this deadline.
Differences you'll notice in this draft and the last draft is I added some numbers to PR. And those came from conversations that I just had briefly with other local partners that have starting budgets of this. I used.
You added them to what?
I added draft numbers to the draft,
Right, but you said to the PR?
to PR, so.
PR, what's PR?
Public relations.
Okay.
Advertising, marketing. So our a draft tip table and the tip and development memo said we have about 10,000, which isn't a lot for a marketing. It's a start considering we didn't have any. That is divided in two spaces. I put 2,000 for downtown map. It looks like that's how much we had invested before. This is something that I've heard during my business retention visits as an asset. I know we have some of them still posted around. When I go to visit businesses and they have the old map, I know they're still being appreciated. We haven't talked about that. That's an interest that we have. I put that number there, which means the remaining 8,000 that we talk about in the development and TIF plan amendment I have in the promotions, PSAs, for advertising, newsletter, mailing, retainers, the website development, kind of numbers. Their starting numbers will give us a step from that year. Another adjustment is in required expenditures. I put originally, the first time we looked at this, I put the same number. Insurance was about the same as it was from last year, but this upcoming year, we're gonna have a bond payment on the executive director. It says in the city ordinances and it says in our charter that we have one and we currently don't, so that's something I have to add. I have a phone call with our insurance guy today, who's gonna kind of give me an idea of what that's gonna cost. So I'll have a better idea this afternoon on that number. Then in the notes, I added some additional numbers that we have discussed in the development and TIF plan amendment that I didn't necessarily put right away in the actual numbers themselves. Kind of looking for board direction on what our involvement, what we want that to look like this upcoming year, and what our intentions are for those projects. But also appreciative if anyone else has any comments on where these numbers changed from the last draft to this draft. You'll notice that holiday decorations, landscaping, those numbers kind of adjusted from past years because now we have a city service agreement. So in the past, we paid for labor individually for these activities, but now we're paying a lump sum for everything. So both events, for the downtown Riverwalk cleanup, for the sidewalk cleanup, merchants, the paint, snow removal, that's all covered in a different area now. So those numbers are lower because we're only paying for actual decorations, actual tools or resources in those areas. We talked about doing a rental rehab program and the development TIF plan. That's about $30,000 a year. We didn't have a whole lot of discussion about our programs at our January 7th meeting, the facade grant, the revolving loan, liquor license, the downtown dollars, other than we're glad we have them. So I added it to the notes, but didn't put it in there immediately.
Could I ask a favor? Could we just start at the beginning and kind of go through section by section and walk through your notes? Because kind of jumping around and I'm trying to follow and I'm just getting lost. So that would help me.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, I took all of my notes on the previous version. So I'm trying to like figure out, well, where did this go now? And
You let us know where you have a comment and we'll let you know where it is. I just wanted to do an overall some of the
that's
major
fine.
changes.
It seemed like you were getting at a level of detail that was like, I need to kind of start. I'm just gonna start at the beginning and go through it.
I like that idea. So as you notice at the top, I don't have our revenue numbers.
When will we have that?
Soon.
Okay.
Is there any idea as to where they might be coming in? I mean,
Correct, he told me they were about the same.
Well, I mean, that's
Yeah.
kind of what I would assume is,
He didn't give me a
Valuations
number
haven't
increase. Right.
jumped or a lot, but he's not necessarily indicating that there might be a decrease.
No.
I mean, I would expect a small, less than 1% type increase. That's kind of where things have been. But, sometimes we get decreases and that puts a different spin on things. So we can kind of look at last year's numbers and kind of say maybe a couple $1,000s more.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep,
I think that's helpful, just
don't
especially for
quote
new
me, but I
members.
think he was saying something like 1 to 2% increase. So in that first section, the required expenditures, the one adjustment of not knowing what the bond payment looks like for the year. So I increased from 2,350 to 3,000. I'll know more this afternoon what that number looks like. And then, of course, from the last year, you'll notice we don't have 137 because we won't have a bond payment.
So I guess I'll start, with, so you're on expenditures round, right?
Yes.
Okay, so first line of expenditures. We should be able to be budgeting in more detail than just this lump sum. Because that's what we budgeted last year when we didn't know anything. You weren't hired at that time. It was just $110,000 that was going to cover potential things with the chamber, potential all staffing, et cetera, et cetera. We now have agreements in place with organizations that should be more detailed because we now know what it is. So my notes have $15,000 to the chamber, which is, I believe, what our agreement states annually. We've talked about this in a variety of different contexts, but I have in my notes a wish item of $8,000 to the developing housing position, because in going through the process of coming up with the business development agreement with the chamber, that housing piece was a big part of what we had hoped the chamber would do. They didn't feel that they had the resources or the bandwidth to do it, so that ended up getting pulled out, but that's still a big component of both what was identified in Project Rising Tide. It's been on our wish list to develop housing downtown for years. And I know Karen Goodman, I believe, is heading up something in that area. And from what I've heard, the direction they're going is trying to pool resources not dissimilar to what has been done with the chamber to hire at least part-time a housing coordinator to kind of take all of these efforts and move them forward, not only in our district, but the city as well as the county. So I think if we still consider that important, I think we need some budgeted dollars toward that. So I've plugged in 8, And then that leaves $87,000 for staffing, both for Caitlin, salary benefits, and then still pending our discussion around, are we looking at additional part-time help to kind of allow Caitlin to be more effective? So that's how I've taken that 110,000 and broken it out into 3 items, which I think reflect where we are.
You put in 15,000 and 8,000.
15 for the chamber, so basically taking that 110, pulling out 15,000 for the chamber, 8,000 for housing, leaving 87 for staff. Okay. Because I think whatever draft we put together has to have that level of detail, otherwise we're going to confuse city council, because that number has been discussed in every single city council meeting.
Now having that broken out would be helpful. Keep moving down.
And everyone appreciative of his conversation on the housing position?
I think it's a good starting point.
I think it's part of our housing plan from October. We were just invited this past 2 weeks, I guess. Housing North wants to put that position together, and they've asked a diversity of businesses to be involved. Our Manistee Forward and our housing plan both says that the DDA are going to be doing housing type projects and tasks within the next 1 to 5 years. And of course, we don't have the capacity. We were asking the chamber to have that type of participation, and they didn't want to. That's not in their realm either. So I think that's great to purposefully allocate and say we'll participate in that, since we did adopt the housing plan and did say we were going to participate in the Manistee Forward tasks, to say that we'll complete those.
My next comment, hearing no one else jumping in, under training, and I'm sorry I was sick at the last meeting, I know this was discussed and certain things were approved. That $2,000 is a jump. I guess, is that currently all allocated on things the board has already approved, or where is that number coming from?
We did talk about specific numbers, and at our last conversation, we talked about anything that is DDA related, the board were willing to contribute. But of course, as you saw, I put my whole wish list on there just to show what was being involved. Any types of certifications or additional education is on the person for their own professional development. But at the last board meeting for this past year, and partly because there were some extra costs of scholarships and that kind of thing that it was 25. I don't know that we'll need that for next year, but I would like an office support to be involved and attend occasional summits, attend occasional toolboxes when someone comes into the office. They're aware of resources that are available to them. So I didn't put it at the 25, but I did want to limit our potential to have that person additionally have that type of knowledge as well.
Okay, that background helps me to understand where the number comes from. Thanks.
What else, Barry?
You notice I did from last year, there was 1,000 in office supplies and equipment. I put 1,500 for this upcoming year as a new laptop. We've inherited a second printer for that office support.
Okay, this is just a small note, but under maintenance, I think in our TIF plan, we're basically saying $40,000 annually. So I think that line item should be 40 and not 43, which would reduce the paver work to 37. To kind of split that difference.
That's in the TIF.
Yeah, one of the things I did when I went through this is I went through the TIF budget and kind of made sure that the numbers in here reflected that. So, again, this is another thing of tying it into what the TIF plan says, and that's under beautification flowers. My notes say
Yeah.
that we have 20,000 in the TIF plan, not 25. And I think part of the reason that comes down is more of the work is now on the city services agreement than was being budgeted separately here.
Barry, what are your comments on the trees, the hanging baskets, the water, the landscaping portion? So on the TIF plan, we indicate, I'm trying to get creative. Where does that fit in? And okay, so our most recent copy, it says $40,000 for streetscape update refurbishment. Is that where you see that funding?
Yes, yes. So things like painting, that's part of that streetscape refurbishment. The TIF plan didn't break it down into more detail, so that's kind of anything that we're budgeting that's really doing those beautification tasks on that infrastructure, that's what that item is about.
So the downtown maintenance, the 40,000, that's up in the maintenance section, that's
Correct.
not down under beautification.
Correct.
Okay. And then, under facade grant program, indicated in the TIP plan, it says we'll do 30,000. It says we'll do $20,000 in river facade and deck grants, and then another, is this additionally where we put the 100,000 a year for the West Shore Community College facade grant enhancements?
I think West Shore, well,
Do we have a different place that you recommend either one of those?
I think each is different. So I think as it relates to the West Shore Riverwalk improvements, I think that's a project by itself and should be a separate item. Which quite frankly, I don't see that we're going to be able to accomplish in this budget this year, which will lead me to another conversation later. As it relates to the river facades, that would be on top of that 30, my recollection, I would have the TIF in front of me. 'Cause
Yeah.
that's a separate item, right?
Yeah, correct. So we have it set,
But when does that kick in year one, or is that?
it does.
Okay.
In 1 to 5 years, we say we'll spend $100,000 on river facade and deck grants.
Okay. So yeah, that should be an additional item.
Okay. Is that helpful for everyone? Add a separate one for the West Shore investment?
Definitely.
Well, and that's another item I've got here, is I think we need to be careful, because there's two West Shore items. There is one item which is essentially our reimbursement to them. I'm gonna be careful with my words. Because they can only accept money in certain ways and we can only give them money in certain ways. But unless this has changed, for our leasing of the parking lot and structure, is that payment in here in the budget? It was not in the previous one, so that needs to be added. And my understanding is that that's probably on the order of $25,000.
I think it was 30?
I don't know if any numbers have been talked, I was just kind of doing some math of, we
Correct, that's
we
kind of-
roughly promised 500,000. divide that by X number of years,
I
25, 30,000. But
Yeah.
since we've already approved that, details have yet to still be kind of come through, that definitely needs to be a line item in here, because that's something that's gotta happen at the expense of other things.
Okay.
So again, I started that by, there's two West Shore things. There's our leasing the parking structure, which is basically providing the revenue to do the overall project. And then a separate item we have in the TIF plan, which is to beautify the Riverwalk by working collaboratively with them. And just so the board knows, is that the design committees had one joint meeting with Crystal, and at our next meeting this month, the intention is that they're gonna come back with their architect and actually have some conceptual designs as to what might happen there that we could be funding.
So we need to treat them as separate.
Yes, yes, because they're not necessarily on the same timelines.
Yep.
For the next section, the project section, we have quite a few TIF allocated projects. So I'm curious what the board's thoughts are for them. I added that 2,000 for the downtown map. We have in our TIF plan that we're spending 30,000 a year on rental rehab programs. We say we'll do $20,000 for property acquisition. We say we'll do, so, and I apologize, I've got my notes here. The Riverwalk capital improvements, West Shore Riverwalk Plaza, and intersection enhancement. We've all got funding that we say we're gonna do this first year.
Well, technically, we say we're gonna do within the first 5 years. But for discussion, you gotta
For
put something in
discussion.
to,
It says we'll spend 40,000 on the Riverwalk capital improvement, 50,000 a year for the Riverwalk Plaza for the college, and 20,000 for intersection enhancements.
and maybe now's as good a time as any to mention a component that I believe is missing, or we need to think of how we're going to accomplish it, because it's something that needs to happen probably in parallel, and that is, if you recall from the conversations around the TIF plan, there is more there than we can fund, especially in the early years. With revenue growth over time, we hope that toward the end of that, we'll be in a different position. But really, for us to accomplish any of those major tasks, we're going to need to go out and bond money to basically get that capital up front to do those projects that we then have the 25 years to pay back. There's no way we're going to ever be able to accomplish in the timelines laid out in that TIF plan, any of those projects by just looking at yearly cash flow. So, and those approvals, just happened. So, but that's the next step. And, this obviously has its own schedule where we need to get these things in this month. But we just need to think about those two items of, there's our operating budget, but we also need to be thinking about how we're going to fund the projects in that plan in a way that actually allows us to do anything in the next 5 years. Otherwise, roughly this budget is $200,000 in deficit, which means we're going to have to cut out all of these things that we said in our TIF plan we're going to do. And the only way we're going to do them is by bonding and getting some of that revenue, essentially pulling that ahead from future years so that we can do some of those projects and have that impact now.
Barry, are you suggesting that adopt a deficit, budget, and then go out for bonding and then adjust?
That's hard. I mean, it might be this year we don't do a lot of these things and we have that conversation, because these timelines are so tight to really know what deficit we'd be comfortable with. I think is hard at this point to pinpoint.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we honor our commitment, especially
I
in
know,
college.
I know.
And,
Well, before you came in, you know, I made sure that that got put in here because that was missing. And I said, you know, my comment was, well, that's a non-movable item. Everything else has to be cut before those commitments that we've agreed to, so.
So do you have a suggested path forward?
I've never gone through a bonding process, so I don't. I don't even know how long something like that takes. I mean,
Well,
you could probably provide some
Yeah, we can get
guidance
some
on that.
guidance from Ed.
Right.
And the steps we have to go through. I'm just thinking of in terms of getting a budget into the city's budget process. Do we want to just get down to a balanced budget, subject to bonding, and then amend afterwards?
That might be a good way of doing it.
Okay.
I mean, the conversation we're having here, we'll have to have the same conversation with council to explain, well, your TIF plan said you were gonna do all these things and your budget says you're not. So we need to, you know, inform on some of these timing issues of how we can do some of these things.
Caitlin, when's our next regularly scheduled board meeting?
March 11th. Don't quote me. March 11th,
Yeah, next Wednesday.
next Wednesday.
You know, I'm just thinking maybe a course of action would be to ask Caitlin to come back with some suggested amendments to this or modifications to bring it as close to a balanced budget as you can, pending discussion on bonding. Does that make sense?
It seems like a good order to go in.
Yeah, I'm,
Rather than have a deficit budget, not have a plan.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we would have to cover our deficit with our fund balance, and I prefer not to do that personally right now. And if we can just come to some consensus that we make these adjustments, and then we'll revisit it once we get our bond funding.
That's what I wanted to know.
Does that make sense? Do you need a motion on that?
Now we can do that.
I don't think so, it's just discussion. That's all. Do you have anything else, Barry?
Two other small comments. I'm trying to decipher my note. Under hops and props, my note is too optimistic. You know, we're budgeting a $15,000 profit of that event. And I think that's too optimistic, even though it kind of follows where we've been. But we've had an amazing run of luck with wonderful weather. And if we have a rainy or cold day for that event, it will be a deficit. And I don't want to rely on an optimistic projection when something like that is so weather dependent. I'd rather be more conservative in budgeting. So that's my thought on that particular item. And then, as it relates to Sleigh Bell, I don't understand, from my conversations around that event has always been profitable every year. I don't know why suddenly this year we're budgeting a deficit. I would much prefer to go back to the Sleigh Bell Committee and say, no, you have to figure out a way of at least breaking even on this event. You can't be, for an event that has historically been profitable, suddenly come in and say, oh, we're gonna lose money this year. No, that's gotta be back on that committee, my opinion.
Does it have to do with our discussions about televising?
Yeah, I think that's.
Not
probably
this
what we're
question.
talking
Not this amount.
Okay.
These are the amounts that they did for the last year. And Sleigh Bell Committee is still trying to find all of their sponsors and is still in the midst of trying to find out some of this paperwork from the last event. Between the changing some of the committee members, they're still in the reorganization stage. So they're covered, but
I mean,
Up
again,
until
my
this
thought
event.
there is, the direction we need to tell that committee is you need to be working towards a break-even event. historically, we host events for a lot of reasons, but one of those reasons is to make money. Sladeville has traditionally been closer to break even. It's not been as much of a fundraising type event as some of the other ones. But planning for it to lose money, I don't think is proper budgeting at this point.
The revenue of 12,000 and the expenditures of 16, those are actual for this past? Okay.
Any idea why their sponsorships have declined? Have they offered any insight?
I don't know that they have declined for this past year, they're just,
What I would say is there's some challenges around actually tracking down who sponsors were, whether they paid or not.
but that's gonna be different moving forward with some of the new committee members.
So it's more of a management oversight of the process than the fact that the sponsorships weren't there to cover the expenses.
Yeah, I was just looking at the revenues, took it from 21,500 to 15,000 to 12,000 actual. I just wondered if we had an understanding of why we had that drop in revenue.
We're trying to figure that out, agreed.
I think it was a bookkeeping, not knowing, who owes what yet.
Okay.
In terms of the sponsors.
Are you hopeful that revenue might increase once you take a look at it?
Yes, I say that, because I'm using actual numbers, and there are people that have guaranteed or made promises for sponsorships, but they're still collecting them.
Do you think that's something you have a better handle on by the next board meeting?
By the March 11th one, by the end of March, I definitely will,
Okay.
yes.
And I've got a couple of questions. I just apologize for not being here earlier. Just on the TIF revenue, I noticed that we took quite a decline of about $11,000 or $11,000. Any reason why you're projecting that decline?
I have not received our TIF revenue numbers, so they're not in the 2021 budget number yet.
Okay. But if the prior year we had about $11,000 decline, I just wondered if you had some insight on
I apologize, I made the comment that he believes it will be a 1 to 2% increase from last year.
that. Right.
Thad, are you asking about 2018 to 2019, why that
Yes.
increase? Okay.
Yeah, it went down, and I seem to recall that the growth in that year that we had was in basically the downtown area, and any growth we had, so I would have expected some increase in revenues. Maybe that's a net question, if you can ask him. Yeah. I think that was really all I had, was just that. Belabor the point.
And then one more at the last line. So on Spark, my understanding is that the winner receives basically a $5,000 ballpark prize. I don't see how you accomplish that if your expenses are only $2,600. So is something about those numbers for Spark not accurate, or what's?
We're still waiting to hear back from sponsors on Spark.
Okay, so those are more actual numbers.
Yes.
Not budget numbers for next year. So I guess,
I apologize, so when I looked at these last event ones, they were rounded numbers, but they were the rounded actuals. So that's what I put in for this, me trying to get an idea of what they look like.
okay.
So that's me being honest at where we are with those 3 events.
So as it relates to Spark, did that event this past year attract enough sponsorship dollars to cover its expenses, or did the DDA subsidize it?
DDA subsidized.
And to how much? I mean, is it the $134, or was it more than that?
More than that.
Okay. I think, given that, I think the budget numbers from last year are probably closer to being the right budget numbers, considering you're giving out $5,000 prize, the number at least has to be 5,000. And then probably the deficit should be whatever, you know, I'm sure you could reach out to Val and get a number from her that is her kind of conservative amount as to what might be coming from this organization and kind of build that in. So again, I mean, since we're putting together a budget, these should be budget numbers, not just partial actuals from last year.
Yeah.
Maybe just moving those partial actuals to the line, the notes.
The note section.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any feedback that for Caitlin or for the board?
I guess I just have a couple of questions. I know this is only the second meeting, so forgive me if I'm being redundant in any way, but the Slate-All Committee, do they have something that, I mean, if you guys have seen it, maybe I have a breakdown of where they're getting their money from in terms of sponsorships, where they're looking to get income, is it coming from the sponsors, and then the cost breakdown? Just something for me to kind of peel through.
I can give you a QuickBook actual numbers.
Okay.
Like, most Slidell and Spark will have different committees this upcoming year. So we'll have different
I'm
intentions,
interested in the
but
Spark thing too.
But I guess isn't, again, not being at the last meeting, wasn't there an event policy adopted? Or was that not?
that's asking our chairs to provide information for us, yes.
Exactly, so
Yeah.
part of that new policy is the board should be getting from the event chairs that level of information at various points of the process that we've not gotten in the past.
Correct.
There's a requirement for a work plan.
Yes.
And the budget is in the work plan.
Yes.
Budgets are,
Including committee members, timelines, and financial budgets.
do you get updated versions of that throughout the year? Or is that just?
I've been meeting with
Okay.
each one of the chairs and talking to them and what that looks like.
Okay.
But the policy does have a couple milestones where
Yeah,
updates
I
are
think it
required.
has the 1 year, 6 months.
And the other thing I had was the map.
Yeah.
So that $2,000 that's based on paper, basically, right? Printing, developing the map and printing it, and then having it at certain locations, right?
Assuming we're not doing an app at the moment, correct?
Oh, which is what I was going to touch on, that might have been talked about in previous meetings then. We thought about QR codes, where you could make, like, visit our map, and like a QR code, put it on storefronts, and then it can be scanned. It's safe paper, and it's also something that you can update periodically if the business closes or moves or whatever. Then we don't have to print every year either. So it can evolve continually. Obviously, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah,
This
we haven't
budget-
actually had a conversation on the downtown map, other than the merchants have indicated, and we've done it before. And in our January 7th strategic planning meeting, we said we wanted to be more engaged and that we wanted to have better public relations. And between the two goals, I put a draft number in there.
Where do you see the effort to do that falling? Given our committee structure, it doesn't seem to fit in any of our existing committees. So is it probably just a staff item for you to be developing? Because that's potentially a big project that could be.
I will not be doing that alone.
I'm just saying that's, I'm just
Yes.
concerned about, well, yeah, here's a new project, that's only $2,000, but yet it takes a huge amount of your time because it doesn't fit anywhere else in our structure. So I'm concerned about that aspect of that.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm asking questions and seeing who has the knowledge about that and seeing who's willing to be involved in that,
Okay.
100%.
I think $2,000 is conservative, too conservative. When we look at printing, possibly an app, that's pretty, even hiring a firm to put it together, 2,000, could be 5,000.
So, correct. And I printed out what our pay authorizations looked like when we did this type of thing before.
Okay.
And correct, for the brochures, it was just above 2,000 between paying someone to do it, doing the printing multiple times, changing the images. I don't know that it will be as choppy as it was before.
But I think part of where Kyle's going with this is, if the idea is to take the existing map, which is now out of date, and updating it and printing,
Yeah.
that's probably 2,000. If the project is, oh, that's not what we want to do, we want to do something else, and it's got to be some digital components of whatever that means, you're starting back at ground zero. There's a lot more time involved in that. That's probably a bigger project than 2,000. So I think, you know, if we're going to budget 2,000, what we're really saying is it's an update of the existing map, same format. If we want something else, then we probably need to be budgeting more.
For year one, I would love to see this as a stepping stone. So if you did an app or an application, that's much more involved. It's much more expensive. It can be a little bit more interactive. I don't have enough information to do that here immediately. So correct, I'm hoping this is a stepping stone for us to developing something greater.
Okay.
And how does that take into account the CVB's ideas and plans to do a welcoming center at the intersection, right?
Yes.
I mean, at some point, ideally, you would have something that would be interactive, that would be like kiosks staged various places around town, that you could work with a QR code
And to the
So
extent
maybe
that we
the
could
thing
get
to do-
another organization to fund
Yep.
some or all of this is even better.
Yes.
So maybe the thing to do would be to take what is currently available and update it so that it fits into the budget structure that you've developed. And then we look ahead to what Little River Holdings does, and we have the, and the CPD.
Yes, all of it. There are certain companies that are willing to put their own kiosks out as long as ads pay for them. There's the conversation about what it looks like if we do purchase our own kiosks. There's the conversation of what the interactiveness looks like at the Welcome Center. The CBB did used to have an app that used to have a downtown map in it, and it did have a more interactive events pages for us. And as our partnership has changed over the past couple of years, both the app has dropped and our websites have become less interactive. So another piece that we are building is that relationship and having that more engagement and getting that additional support. So of all of those pieces, absolutely, I see all of them developing in the near future. I just don't know what they turn into in this moment for this budget. But I didn't want to not address it at all.
And just I'll throw out there as a cautionary tale, being on the CVB and going through some of those conversations around its app. Having that app, just the licensing fees were about $5,000 a year, plus then content creation, et cetera. The CVB dropped it because it was not being used. That's, the CVB finds that paper, as crazy as it sounds, is actually what occasional users want. Apps tend to work better for something that's very repetitive and ongoing, and there's interactions on a regular basis. That's not necessarily our target customer, nor is it the CVB. So they moved away from that. Now, just because they moved away from it, that doesn't mean that technology hasn't evolved and there's now something that would work better, but it's not, oh, you make it digital and it's going to be perfect. These are things that need to be discussed and thought through a lot more.
Having limited knowledge on that, I'm very appreciative for their already experience and me learning through this process with them.
Anybody else have any budget comments, discussion? Then I'm gonna,
So I guess my
go ahead.
understanding is that today we kind of just walked through and realized we've got a $200,000 deficit. And we're basically directing staff between now and our next board meeting to basically do staff's budget version based on comments today, based on our strategic planning, based on our own knowledge. And then really at our next meeting is where we basically try to come up with something that approaches a balanced budget. And then we also have then this conversation in parallel around a bonding proposal during this year that might allow us to do some additional items on our TIF plan by basically giving that capital more upfront as opposed to 20 years out. Is that the summary of what I've heard today?
That's my understanding.
Good.
Agreed. Good with that? Okay. I'll move on to new business. Don't see any new business. Board member comments? None? Hearing none. Public comment?
Can't say something. Just tell us what you're doing. You gotta come up to the microphone.
They did. I did come to the last meeting.
Oh, okay. Okay, again, I wasn't at the last meeting, so sorry. Peer pressure to do something.
Update for Scary Art Park. I spoke with the owner, and she is willing to allow us to do whatever we want with it, as long as it's not permanent. But I mentioned to her about the swap. She doesn't want to do a swap at this time.
You talked to the owner of the property? Sorry to interrupt you.
Scary Art Park.
But the owner of that property?
Cynthia.
Okay.
Correct. She's actually my husband's cousin.
Oh.
That property has been in their family since the 1800s, and they don't want to get rid of it. The children
It's
are
very interesting to
interested
know
in
that piece.
building there again.
Okay.
So she's coming in the summer, and she would be willing to look at the property across the street, but for now, she's just giving us her blessing to go ahead with whatever it is that we want to do with it.
I still make sure that you get that in writing, cousin.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think we need to have something put together as to what, that we do have, that we do have some kind of piece of paper giving us the authority to, A, take down what is there and be able to put up something that will be temporary, that will fit with her idea of what's going on and so forth. So I don't know whether we need to have the city attorney do that, or whether we need to just draft something that would kind of more or less conform.
When I think legal documents, I think city attorney. I think that'd be the-
Well, I'm asking, do we
Yep,
need?
I think so. If
Okay.
we're gonna make improvements to property that doesn't belong to us, we better have the intended authority to do that. So we have to do that in agreement.
So I think that's what we would like to ask, and that's really why I wanted Roger to stay too, because I wanted to get a,
Is that, Caitlin, is that something that you could coordinate?
Design committee, do we
Yes.
need to decide what we would like to
Well,
do
there's-
on activating that
I
site?
don't think that's a decision by the design committee.
Well-
I think first of all, we have to get control of the property so we can make those changes and then go back to some committee. But I want,
But, I mean, this project is currently a project on the design committee's plate.
right.
So there's a lot of things that come into play here. One, from a budget standpoint, we don't, in the current fiscal year, have budgeted dollars to do those types of improvements. We have budgeted dollars to acquire. So at the board level, we would, at our next meeting, maybe want to consider reallocating those dollars to a different purpose so that, we've got the ability to do something. Because if we're gonna try to fit that into the budget we're talking about, that's even another challenge.
I don't necessarily disagree, but those monies won't be necessary if we don't get authorization.
Correct, so there are parallel things.
That's the
that-
point.
Well, and I'll just add to that, what you're saying is a significant development, because in the past, we have been unsuccessful in having communication with the owner of the property. So this is helpful.
Yes.
So I was just gonna suggest that Caitlin work with the city attorney and get some kind of an agreement hammered out. And then, while we're doing that, in anticipation of it, if we need to engage with the design committee, that's well. But I wouldn't wanna go too far until we know we have something in writing that we can do what we need to do.
Where is this place located? I'm sorry, I was not at the last meeting. Where
It's
is this
across the
located?
street from, Davis Barber.
Has everyone met Kelly and Catherine?
It's a pocket park on the south
Like
side
paintings.
of River Street that's currently got some large paintings.
Oh, okay. I'm transplant,
And absolutely with the design committee, we're absolutely willing to work. We have some people who have some ideas about things that can be done and get some funding from some of the companies around here to actually accomplish that. So, yeah, if we can get the authorization in writing from the owner, and then we can proceed with some of the stuff that's going around that crazy heads here.
Although you had a hard time getting in contact with her, she is a lovely lady, and she is pro Manistee, and she is adamant that some form of property is still kept in her family because of,
Having that piece of information
Yeah.
explains an awful lot about the whole history of that parcel, so that's really helpful to
she's
know.
very happy with what's going on, and she's pro Manistee.
Thank you for making that connection as well, so.
Okay, any other public comment? Thanks for
I'll
coming.
just,
Go ahead.
one more is, the two of you hosted a wonderful community forum. And this was one of the topics that came out of that, and it's great to see that in a matter of a week, there's already progress.
We have no patience.
Thank you.
So just, if I can ask some more clarifying questions, I apologize. So you guys maybe have some funding that would be able to go ahead and proceed forward with that property? Or something lined up anyway?
Well, one of the ideas that we had, some of you are aware, but anyway, one of them was to do a Morton Salt sculpture, the girl with the umbrella. And to get that done, we would want to go, obviously, part of our plan is to go talk with Morton Salt and see if they would, in fact, not only give us their permission to use their logo, but also to put some money behind it. So that's part of where we're going in this. In terms of money, we are all volunteers and we are self-funded. We're not asking you for any money. However, any participation that is already in your books to do some of these things, we're willing to work with you, whether it's on a volunteer basis or pitch in something, we'll do that. But again, we are very new. We're only, 6 weeks old maybe, and we're doing whatever we can do. But we do have a number of people that have offered up a variety of talents in areas certainly that I don't have. But there you go. Does that answer that?
It does, I guess I just don't want to put any sort of brakes on any momentum you guys have. I mean, I feel like we spend a lot of time talking about minutia, and that has a tendency to slow things down. And I think that when people see forward progress, people get excited and want to become engaged. And that's just my own personal opinion, and I know that we have to be sure that we follow the constraints of budgetary considerations, but I also feel like, I don't want to be any sort of roadblock, personally or professionally.
Well, we
What you
can't afford to do what the city can afford to do, and the city can't defer to some of the things that we can do, the littler projects, the small, prettier projects or whatever that, you've got a lot of stuff on your plate at this point with not only some of the development projects, but also some of the maintenance issues and so forth in the city. So we're not trying to take away from you, we're trying to be an adjunct to whatever it is that you all are trying to accomplish.
I think that's a great idea that you're going to businesses and asking them for their input. Absolutely. Thank you.
I appreciate your enthusiasm and your efforts as well,
Thanks.
both of you, thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support.
Thank you all, see you next Wednesday at the latest.